Well, it looks like the camera's rolling, so we'll get started with this overview of Chapter 14 in Bauer and Erdogan's Organizational Theory and Behavior textbook. And this chapter is about organizational structure and change. Two topics that I'm not completely sure why they put into the same chapter. You could certainly have a chapter on each. There's an awful lot that is written and that needs to be understood about the type of structure that we put into place in our organizations, and then you could spend an entire semester talking about change and how it happens and what drives it and how we react to it, how we deal with people who don't embrace it. Again, that could be a chapter all in itself, but for some reason Bauer and Erdogan either felt like they were running out of pages or felt like they were kind of needing to draw the book to a close or something, decided to put these two things together. The overview quickly of the chapter is that we start talking about the components that determine what our structure is. The first one is related to where we make decisions. Are they centralized at the top, or are they decentralized at the department level, or even at the extreme, allowing every individual to make their own decisions? The second component relates to how formal our organization is. Do we have policies and procedures and handbooks and manuals and reference tools and job descriptions and so forth? Or in that typically is so that there are no questions. We know. We don't have to debate it. We can't make the wrong decision because it's all written down somewhere. The alternative to that is a low formalization where we kind of do what feels right. And if we make a mistake, we back up and we fix it and we move on. The third component is the hierarchy of the organization, whether it's a tall organization or a flat organization, and that refers to the number of layers that we have of management and how many people each of those managers oversees or supervises. That concept of supervising people is known as span of control. We'll talk about that a little bit. The fourth component is departmentalization, or really gets to how we structure our organization. Do we create divisions based upon functions like marketing and accounting and human resources and production and so forth? Do we create divisions based upon what we do, like tractors and weed eaters and toilet plunging equipment and things like that? Do we create divisions based upon where we are? We have the Atlanta and the Phoenix and the New York and the Chicago divisions. Each one of those has its own particular positives or pluses, and we just got to think about what we're trying to accomplish and what's the best way to get there. So departmentalization. The fifth component is the structure that we have overall, and typically we refer to them either as a mechanistic structure, which is fairly rigid and bureaucratic, or an organic structure, which is kind of like the amoeba, or it's pouring the water on the counter and it just kind of takes whatever shape it takes, or it takes the shape of the container that it's in. The other kind of structure is a matrix structure, which gets a little more complicated. Beyond the components of the organizational structure, the book in this chapter, as we said, talks about change, types of responses to change, and types of resistance to change, why we resist change and how we deal with people who resist change. And then there's a model that's given. It's kind of referenced in passing in terms of where it came from, but talks a little bit about what it is and how we manage the various phases of that. But it was developed by a guy named Kurt Lewin, and it's the three-step change model. And very simply, he says that we're kind of going along the way we've always done it. At some point, we're kind of frozen in those things. We're not likely to change much. We have to unfreeze the way that we do things. We have to make the change, and then we have to refreeze the new way of doing it. So unfreeze, change, and refreeze. And we talk about in the chapter and in the lecture how we can do things to improve our likelihood of success in each of those stages. What can we do to improve the likelihood that we back up and say, we've always done it this way, but let's think about a different way. How do we actually make the change? If we find that the change is working, what are some things that we do to make sure that this change sticks? And maybe more importantly, if it's not quite working, but there's still hope, how do we make sure that people don't give up on it? All that we talk about In the lecture video, which lasts about 28 minutes, that's not unreasonable to consider since it's taken this long just to give you the overview, 28 minutes and 22 seconds. After that, obviously, the summary that we always do, the quiz, the 10 questions, true, false, multiple choice. At the conclusion of this chapter, there are 2 assessments. One of them is our organizational structure preference. Tries to get to whether we feel better if we are in a mechanistic structure where there are rules, or whether we feel more comfortable in an organic structure where there's a lot of freedom to make decisions and so forth. And then assessment 38 is the tolerance of change scale, and it tries to put us into a box that indicates whether we have a high tolerance for change, meaning that we adapt to it. Whatever happens, happens. It's gonna, change is one of those givens in the world, and we're okay with that, or whether we have a moderate level of tolerance or a low level of tolerance. I don't want things to change. It's hard to pick. If I were to look at all these chapters, which ones were better, this one may not be at the very top, but it's got some good ideas in it, with the understanding, as we just said, that change always happens. The better we are able to deal with it, to lead it, to embrace it, to champion it, probably the more successful we are. Anyhow, I welcome you to go on into the lecture video, go a little bit more depth than what we've talked about here, and hope that everything is going well and you're making the kind of grades that you want. Looking forward to the thing being over here in another chapter or 2, and that you can reflect back on this and find some things that really apply to your work life and can make you a stronger manager, a better leader at what you do.